My name is Emily Harper, and at 26, I found myself crouched on a cold tile floor, blotting up rainwater with the sleeve of my sweater because the ceiling in my one-bedroom apartment had started to leak. But what cut deeper than the steady drip over my coffee table was the message I got 5 minutes later from my cousin Lily. "Dinner at the estate tomorrow. Don't be late." No, how are you? No, are you okay? Just another summons, as if I were the help. What they didn't know was that inside the envelope Aunt Margaret once called an emergency loan was every cent I'd saved for college. And that wasn't the only secret I kept. How does someone become the family's invisible lifeline without anyone noticing they're drowning? If you've ever felt invisible at home, or if this story hits close to your heart, please tap like. It lets me know I'm not alone out here. It started with the scratch of graphite on thick recycled paper. I was sketching sample logos for a bakery client, second revision, unpaid, while the late autumn wind rattled my window in Richmond. The radiator hissed in protest, barely pushing warmth into the tiny room I called my studio. My fingers were ink-stained, my laptop wheezing under 3 open programs, and I hadn't eaten since yesterday's cold noodles. Still, the memory came back like it had just happened. I was 16. My bedroom smelled like lavender dryer sheets and the lemony cleaner Aunt Margaret liked to use when she was in a rare good mood. I had just landed my first freelance gig designing a birthday invitation for someone's niece. $75 in cash. I stared at the bills on my desk for a long minute before I tucked them into a plain white envelope and wrote, "For Aunt M, urgent," in shaky block letters. She never said thank you. I told myself it didn't matter. Family helps family. But it did matter, because one envelope turned into another, then 10. And when college letters came and I didn't have the heart to fill out FAFSA because I'd promised to help keep the house running, Aunt Margaret smiled and said, "Maybe next year." That next year never came. My sketch pad slipped from my lap and landed face down. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at the water stain forming on my ceiling, watching it spread like something alive. A ping from my phone startled me. Lily again. "Dinner at the estate tomorrow. Don't be late." 7 words, no emoji, no warmth. But it wasn't the message that unsettled me. It was the timing. Lily wasn't the type to reach out unless something was brewing, and lately I'd felt it, like a hum beneath the surface. Something was about to crack. I stood slowly and walked to the tiny kitchenette. The linoleum curled at the corners, and the smell of burnt toast from my neighbor's unit wafted through the vent. I opened the cabinet. Just 3 packets of instant soup left. I poured hot water into a chipped mug and stirred, watching the powder swirl. My reflection rippled across the surface, blurred and tired. Maybe I was tired of being the family's silent scaffolding. Aunt Margaret always said I was the quiet one, the steady hand, the good girl. But what she meant was the one who wouldn't fight back. And somehow, over the years, I started to believe that being useful meant being invisible. That saying no made me selfish. That silence was love. But lately, something inside me was changing. I sat back down at my desk, the radiator ticking behind me like a slow, broken clock. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one I rarely touched. Inside was a folder labeled "Emergency Only." Receipts, screenshots, a copy of an old check I'd written to cover Lily's first semester housing deposit. I stared at my own handwriting. My signature. I shut the drawer before I could fall into it. There was still soup in my mug. Still time to back out of dinner tomorrow. Still time to pretend I didn't feel that tightening in my chest, but I couldn't shake it. Not the chill that ran down my spine the second Lily's message popped up. Not the way Aunt Margaret's name still made my hands tremble when I signed checks. And not the question that had been echoing in my mind for months, maybe years. What if everything I sacrificed wasn't just unappreciated, but intentionally erased? The Harper estate sat under a gray Virginia sky like a secret no one wanted to speak aloud. Wide columns, ivy-cloaked brick, and a driveway so long it could silence second thoughts. My boots made shallow clicks across the marble entryway, rain still dampening the cuffs of my jeans. Inside, warmth clung to the air. Roasting meat, buttery potatoes, expensive candles trying too hard to smell like home. I paused at the base of the staircase just long enough to steady my breath. Then I heard her voice. "She's here?" Aunt Margaret. I followed the clatter of cutlery into the dining room. The chandelier above the table glittered coldly, its light too sharp, casting glassy reflections on every polished surface. The table stretched farther than I remembered. 10 seats, all filled except one, mine. Lily avoided my eyes as I took the seat at the far end. Her napkin was already folded in her lap, fingers trembling slightly at the edges. I should have turned around. Margaret raised her wine glass like a queen giving a toast. Her bangles clinked against the stem as she smiled. Tight, too bright. "Emily," she said, her voice slicing through the low hum of conversation. "Still playing with those little doodles of yours? I do hope one day you'll get tired of pretending that's a career." Silverware paused midair. A few polite coughs tried to cover the silence. I didn't answer, just smoothed the crease of the napkin in my lap, feeling the rough linen catch against the dry skin of my thumb. Her smile widened. "You've always had such artistic tendencies. But it's time to grow up, dear. You're nearly 30, aren't you?" 26. I opened my mouth, but Lily spoke first. "She's freelancing full-time now, graphic design." Her voice was soft, too careful. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Freelance? That's what people say when they can't get hired." My throat tightened. I stared down at the roast chicken on my plate, cut into perfect, sterile slices. The steam rising smelled like rosemary and childhood dinners I was never invited to. My fork hovered, then fell against the plate with a sharp clink. "I've worked with real designers," Margaret continued, slicing into her lamb. "They don't live in studio apartments with leaking ceilings." Lily froze. She hadn't said a word about the ceiling. My heartbeat spiked. Margaret knew. Of course she did. "I'm doing fine," I said quietly, voice steady. "I make my own way." Margaret's laugh was low and indulgent. "Oh, darling. No one makes it alone, especially not Harper's. We take care of each other. Isn't that right, Daniel?" Uncle Daniel blinked like he'd been stirred from sleep. He nodded once, not looking up from his plate. I forced a breath through my nose, hands curling under the table until my nails dug into my palms. She didn't stop. "It's just sad," she said, almost with pity. "All that effort, all that time, and nothing to show for it. You're still the same little girl who cried when her art show got canceled because of rain. So fragile." The words dropped like shards of glass, but what hit harder was Lily. She didn't say a word, didn't flinch, just kept chewing. Her eyes fixed on her plate like maybe if she stared hard enough she could disappear. I looked at her, long and sharp. She felt it. Her jaw clenched, a muscle twitching near her temple, but still, nothing. I pushed back my chair. The screech of wood on tile made Margaret's knife pause mid-slice. "Excuse me," I said, standing. No, stay," Margaret said sweetly. "We haven't even gotten to dessert. Lily brought that lemon tart you used to love, didn't you, Lily?" Lily nodded, eyes still down. "Yeah, I did." Her voice cracked, barely, but I heard it. I turned toward the hallway. The chandelier behind me buzzed faintly, the light flickering for just a moment. Or maybe it was just me, breathing too fast, trying to hold back everything I wanted to scream. I passed the portrait of Grandma Eloise on the way out, the only face in the house that ever looked kind. Her eyes followed me, not in judgment, but something else, maybe apology, maybe warning. The hallway was quieter, cooler. My steps slowed near the front parlor, then I heard it. "Why do you let her talk to you like that?" Lily's voice low and trembling. I stopped. Margaret replied, too loud to be unaware I might still hear. "Because she needs to know where she stands. If we let her think she's part of this family, she'll start asking questions." "About what?" Lily asked. There was silence. Too long. Then, "Nothing you need to worry about." My pulse thundered in my ears. I moved away before they noticed. Back in the entryway, the air felt heavier, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. I gripped the doorknob but didn't turn it. Instead, I glanced up the staircase, toward the attic door. No one ever went up there anymore, and suddenly I felt it in my bones. Something was up there, something they didn't want me to see. The hallway upstairs groaned underfoot, each step like a whispered warning. A gust of wind pressed against the attic window above, rattling something metallic inside. I paused at the top of the staircase, glancing back toward the flickering chandelier one floor below, still buzzing, still broken, like the rest of this place. The attic door was just ahead, slightly ajar. No one had mentioned the attic in years, not since Grandma Eloise died. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the doorknob. The air smelled like wood polish and something older, dust, old paper, forgotten time. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The door creaked loud enough to betray me. I slipped inside and gently clicked it shut behind me. It was colder in here. The insulation hadn't held up. My breath fogged slightly as I took a step forward. The attic was bigger than I remembered. Low-beamed ceilings, slanted walls, cobwebs stretched across crates and old furniture draped in sheets like forgotten ghosts. My boots crunched lightly over grit on the floorboards. Each sound felt amplified in the stillness. There was a single bulb dangling from a frayed cord above, swaying just enough to cast shadows that danced across the walls. The bulb buzzed faintly like it was struggling to stay alive. I walked past a box labeled Xmas 1992 and an antique mirror so dusty I couldn't even see my own reflection. My fingers brushed over a wooden chest carved with initials, but it wasn't what I was looking for. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. A trunk, old leather, edges worn raw, corners stitched with rusting studs, and at the top a brass nameplate, E. Harper, Grandma's. I knelt in front of it, knees pressing into the floor. My hand hovered above the latch. It stuck for a second before clicking open. The inside smelled like cedar and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender. There were photo albums, some letters bundled in string, a hand-knit shawl I remembered from when I was a kid. But what stopped me cold was what sat beneath it all. A book, leather-bound, weathered edges, the name Harper, etched faintly in gold across the front cover. It was locked, not with a padlock, but with one of those small metal clasps you'd see on diaries from the 70s, meant to keep out curious fingers, not determined ones. Still, I didn't try to force it open, not yet. I ran my fingers over the cover. The leather was soft and cracked beneath my touch, like a secret begging to breathe. Why was this up here? Why hadn't Margaret ever mentioned it? I reached back into the trunk, digging gently through the lower layers, searching for anything else. Just a few more letters. One addressed to my grandmother in handwriting I didn't recognize. I tucked it under my arm and stood. That's when the floorboard behind me shifted. My body froze. I didn't breathe. It was just one creak. Could have been the house settling. Could have been nothing. Or someone was watching. I stayed still for another 5 seconds, ears straining. Silence. I grabbed the diary and stepped carefully toward the attic door, each step deliberate, trying not to betray the rush in my chest. I slipped back down the stairs, closing the attic behind me, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Back in the guest room, I locked the door. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the diary in my lap, the letter on the pillow beside me. I held the diary to my chest for a moment, like I could absorb its answers through osmosis. I wanted to open it desperately, but I didn't want to break it. I didn't want to risk losing whatever this was before I understood its weight. Instead, I reached for the letter. It was brittle at the edges, as if it had been touched too many times. The envelope wasn't sealed. I slid the paper out carefully and unfolded it. One line, just one. Don't let Margaret find this. She'll bury it again. My fingers went cold. The handwriting matched the one on the back of Grandma's old recipe cards. It was hers. I sat back slowly, the walls of the guest room closing in like padded silence. What had Margaret buried? Why did this diary need hiding? I thought back, years ago, before Grandma got sick. She used to sit at the garden table with a notebook, sipping her tea and writing for hours. I always thought it was poetry. I was too young to ask, but now I wondered, was this the same book? A knock at the door jolted me. Not hard, just once, soft, deliberate. I scrambled, hiding the diary under the comforter, the letter folded inside it. Emily? Lily's voice. I hesitated. Yeah? You okay? I didn't answer at first. My throat was dry. Then, yeah, just tired. A pause. I brought you some tea. My heartbeat kicked up. Tea? Lily never used to do that. I opened the door a crack. She stood there, hair damp from the humidity, eyes darting behind me before she handed over the mug. Chamomile. I could smell the honey. Her voice was low. Be careful. What do you mean? But she was already walking away, barefoot on the hallway runner, not looking back. I shut the door again, locked it, then turned back to the bed. The tea sat untouched, and the diary burned like a weight beneath the blankets. I didn't sleep that night, because no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind, one thing wouldn't stop echoing. Margaret didn't just inherit the estate. She inherited something she never wanted found, and I had it now. The tea Lily brought had gone cold by morning. I hadn't touched it. I just sat there for hours, knees tucked to my chest, eyes locked on the diary still hidden beneath the comforter, like it could wake up and whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. Outside, the sky hung low and dull, the kind of overcast that turns everything a muted gray. Breakfast was quiet, too quiet. I lingered upstairs until the clatter of dishes told me they were already seated. My steps down the hallway felt heavier than usual, like the floorboards were conspiring to betray me. I pushed the kitchen door open, and every conversation halted like I'd triggered a silent alarm. Aunt Margaret looked up from her bone china teacup, steam curling beneath her painted nails. She smiled, slow and predatory. "Sleep well, Emily?" I nodded, though my jaw had been clenched all night. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit. We have something to discuss." I didn't move at first. Then I caught Lily's eyes. They didn't offer anything. Not comfort, not warning, just silence. I sat. Margaret reached into a sleek folder beside her and slid a document across the table toward me. Her rings clicked lightly against the polished surface. "Your grandmother's trust fund," she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "It's under my name now." The words didn't land right away. My brain blinked at the paper, refusing to translate. I looked at the document, legalese, notarized, stamped, my grandmother's name, and next to custodial trustee, Margaret Harper. My chest went hollow. Every sound in the room faded, forks scraping, coffee dripping, the tick of the antique wall clock, all gone. All I could hear was a low, pulsing static in my ears. I looked up. Margaret was already sipping her tea again, like she hadn't just gutted me with a smile. "What?" My voice came out thin, almost foreign. "I took over after Eloise passed," she said casually. "She wasn't well enough to update anything before the end, and someone had to keep the money safe." Safe. For years, I'd assumed that fund was long gone, used for house repairs, debts, Lily's college costs. I never asked. I just let it go, because that's what family does. But now I understood. It hadn't been gone. It had been hidden. I leaned back, air catching in my lungs. "How much?" I asked quietly. She paused mid-sip. "Excuse me?" "How much was in it?" She blinked, setting her cup down. "Irrelevant now." I pushed the chair back slightly. "I don't think it is." Her gaze sharpened. "It was for family emergencies, medical needs, education. You've contributed your share, haven't you? Always so generous." The words dripped sarcasm. My hands curled in my lap. A memory hit me. Me at 19, staring at a college acceptance letter to a university I couldn't afford. I'd folded it quietly and placed it behind my bookshelf like a secret I didn't deserve to chase. I could have gone. I could have gotten out. Margaret continued, "Besides, you're so independent now, freelancing, living in the city. Surely you don't need trust money." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand, flip the table, throw the folder into the fireplace and watch it burn. But instead I looked at Lily. Her face had gone pale. Her fork hovered in midair. "Did you know?" I asked her. She froze. "Emily," I stared harder. "Did you know about the trust?" Lily looked down. Her hands shook slightly. "Yes," she whispered. It hit me like a punch to the gut. "How long?" She didn't answer. Margaret stepped in. "Don't blame her. She was just following instructions." I turned on her. "Instructions? To lie to me? To keep me in the dark while you spent everything meant for me?" "It wasn't yours," Margaret snapped. "It was the family's, and I'm the only one who knows how to manage it." The words rang in my head. "It wasn't yours." I stood slowly. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might bruise from the inside. Lily reached out, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. There was too much I wanted to say, too many years to unravel, too many sacrifices made in silence. but my mouth wouldn't move fast enough to keep up. So I left. I walked out into the overcast morning without a coat. The cold hit my skin like punishment, sharp and bracing. My boots crunched over gravel as I made my way toward the garden, trying to breathe, trying to stay upright. The wind carried the scent of dead leaves and damp soil. I sat on the edge of the stone bench where Grandma used to read, where I used to sit and draw in silence, hoping someone would notice. They never did. My fingers fumbled for the diary in my coat pocket. I ran my thumb over the clasp. What if the answers were already in here? What if Grandma had tried to warn me, and I'd just been too slow? Footsteps approached. I didn't look up. "Emily!" Lily's voice. I stayed silent. She sat beside me, far enough that we weren't touching. "I tried to stop her," she said quietly. "I asked her to tell you. She said it would only make things harder." My throat tightened. "So you let her lie?" "I didn't know how much it meant to you," she said. "I thought you didn't care about the money." I laughed, short, bitter. "It's not the money, Lily, it's the choice. It was never hers to make." She reached into her pocket and pulled something small into her palm, a key. "Here," she said. "It's for the diary." I stared at it. "Why now?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "Because I think you were right. Something's wrong here, and I'm tired of pretending it isn't." I didn't take the key right away, because I didn't know if it was a gift or a setup, but I took it anyway. The brass key sat in my palm, smaller than I expected. It was warm from Lily's hand, but I couldn't tell if it meant redemption, or one more betrayal in prettier packaging. She'd gone back inside without another word, leaving me alone in the garden, just me and the dead silence hanging between bare branches. Wind stirred the dry leaves under the bench, and I felt that familiar ache in my throat again, the one that always came when someone you love hands you a weapon shaped like an apology. I stared at the diary in my lap. My fingers hovered over the clasp, but I didn't open it. Not here, not where anyone could be watching. Instead, I slid the diary into my coat, curled my fingers around the key, and walked slowly back to the house. That evening, the estate felt quieter than usual, like the walls were holding their breath. The hallways stretched longer in the low light, sconces flickering against aged wallpaper. Somewhere down the corridor, I could hear Margaret's heels clicking against tile. I avoided her. I didn't trust my face to hide what I was feeling. Instead, I found Lily again, alone in the garden shed of all places. She was sitting on a milking stool, arms crossed over her knees, her phone dark beside her. She didn't look up when I stepped in. "I had to side with Aunt Margaret," she said before I even spoke. She threatened to cut me off too. Said if I didn't keep quiet about the trust, she'd pull my tuition, my rent, everything. The sharp, musty air inside the shed prickled at my skin. I didn't move closer. "Did you believe her?" I asked. She hesitated. "She's done it before, with Uncle Daniel. Even with Grandma before she passed. She always makes you think you don't have a choice." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to ask how she could sit there so calmly when I'd been scraping rent together while she lived off my silence. But instead, I asked, "Why give me the key now?" Lily finally looked up. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red. "Because I saw her yesterday," she said. "She was in the attic after you went to bed. I don't know what she was looking for, but she was angry." My breath caught. "She knows I found the diary?" Lily shrugged. "She hasn't said anything, but I think she's starting to suspect." The fear in her voice was real. I could see it in the way her fingers twisted the edge of her sweatshirt. She pulled something from her coat, a small envelope, worn and folded at the corners. "I found this tucked behind the dresser in Grandma's sewing room. I think it was meant for you." I took it slowly, heart thudding. Inside was a faded index card, Grandma's handwriting scratched across the surface. "If anything happens, trust your instincts. Follow the paper trail. It's all there. E.H. Paper trail." The words rang like a starting bell. I looked at Lily. "Why are you helping me now?" She hesitated. "Because I'm tired of being afraid of her." I nodded once, then stepped outside, the card still gripped tightly in my hand. Back in the guest room, I closed the door, locked it, and pulled the diary from my coat. I sat on the floor, back against the bed, fingers trembling as I slid the key into the clasp. It clicked open. The pages were yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but every line was deliberate, tight cursive, sharp corners. I turned the pages slowly, careful not to miss a thing. It wasn't poetry, it was documentation, receipts, notations, margins filled with numbers and dates, money pulled from the trust, expenses logged under names that didn't match the distributions Grandma once promised. But the further I read, the more I felt it. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. Notes in Grandma's voice filled the edges. Margaret insisted I transfer control temporarily, regretted it immediately. Lily's education paid in full. Emily not told about her own allocation. Letter drafted to revoke trustee rights, Margaret intercepted. Intercepted. That word made my stomach twist. Had Grandma tried to fix it and been silenced? I kept flipping, hands trembling harder now. Near the back, tucked between 2 pages, was a folded photocopy of something. A will, or a draft of one. Unsigned but notarized. It named me as the sole beneficiary of the Harper estate, property, assets, and the trust. My name. Not Margaret's. Mine. A knock snapped me out of it, sharp, too loud. I shoved the diary under the mattress, heart pounding, and opened the door just a crack. It was Margaret. She smiled, eyes cool as ice. "We're having tea in the parlor," she said. "You should join us." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Sure," I said, voice steady. I closed the door, locked it again, then pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every page. I didn't know what Margaret was planning, but I knew this much. She would burn this house to the ground before she let me take anything from her. It started with a whisper. Not from Margaret or Lily or even the diary, but from the quiet thud at my apartment door after I returned from the estate. I'd barely been home 24 hours. I hadn't unpacked. I hadn't slept. My body still carried the weight of every word Margaret hurled at me, every truth I pulled from Grandma's diary. I'd been living in borrowed quiet, waiting for the next move, and now someone had made it. I crossed the living room, bare feet brushing against the cold hardwood. The hallway light buzzed overhead, casting shadows that seemed to lean toward me. A single white envelope sat on the floor just inside the threshold. No stamp, no return address, just my name in blocky black ink, Emily. My fingers hesitated on the paper, the edges warm from the radiator nearby. I peeled it open slowly. One sentence. "They're watching you. Keep digging." The air stilled. I looked over my shoulder as if the walls might be listening. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peer down into the street. Nothing but wet pavement and a flickering street lamp. But the feeling was already there. That prickle at the base of my neck, like someone had been standing just behind me. I set the letter down and grabbed my phone, flipping through recent messages. Nothing. No missed calls, no texts, just Lily's last ping from the night before. "Let me know you're safe." Safe. I couldn't tell anymore if safety was even real in a family like mine. I sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the envelope in one hand, scrolling with the other. My thumb hovered over the folder I'd labeled quietly on my phone, photos of every diary page, every entry Grandma had written, every number, every secret. That letter, though, it wasn't her handwriting. It wasn't Margaret's either, and the timing was too perfect. Who else knew? I stood and crossed to my desk, yanking open drawers, pulling out the diary itself. I hadn't left it behind. I wouldn't risk it. I needed to match the handwriting, convince myself I wasn't losing it. I flipped open the cover and froze. The ink from the name etched on the first page matched the envelope. The same shaky lines, the same tilted E. It wasn't Grandma's. It was whoever labeled the diary after it had been hidden. Someone had been in that attic before me, and they were still watching now. A gust of wind rattled the glass, making me flinch. I closed the blinds, checked the lock, and sat back down, heart pounding like a warning. I tried to steady my breath, tried to think. Someone wanted me to keep going, but why the threat? Unless it wasn't a threat at all. Unless it was a warning. I reached for my notebook and started a list. People with access to the estate, people who might know the diary existed, people who stood to lose if I found more. Margaret, obviously. Lily? Maybe not. Uncle Daniel? I stopped. He'd been quiet at every meal, watching but never intervening, never asking. That unreadable silence suddenly felt more strategic than passive. And what about the staff? The estate had a gardener, a maid that came twice a week, a handyman on call. I barely remembered their names. I never paid attention. But maybe one of them did. The next morning, a new envelope, same handwriting, slipped under the door while I was in the shower. This one had no message, just a photocopy. A transfer slip, $15,000, from the Harper Family Trust to a private bank account in South Carolina, dated 2 years ago. The account name was redacted, but the transaction ID wasn't. I scanned it, logged it, added it to the growing folder of breadcrumbs. My hands shook as I held the copy up to the light, watching the numbers shimmer under the bulb. The ink was still fresh. Whoever sent this had access to records I didn't even know existed. I checked the envelope again. Nothing else. I should have felt scared. Instead, I felt clear. Margaret had made me the villain for asking questions, but someone else wanted me to ask harder ones. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my bag, and headed for the library. If Margaret thought she could rewrite the past, I was going to write it louder. That afternoon, between stacks of tax documents and trust law books, I found it. The handwriting on the envelope, it wasn't random. It matched a note in the estate's public charity filings from 4 years ago, a signature under a donation letter, L.T. Harland. I didn't know the name, but someone in that house did, and I was going to find out who. The letter still sat on my kitchen table, its black-inked warning echoing louder with each passing hour, but it was the name I couldn't shake, L.T. Harland. A ghost scrawled in the corner of a donation receipt, matching the same crooked handwriting now bleeding into my life. Whoever they were, they'd given me enough to dig. So I did. By nightfall, I had a corkboard tacked up in my bedroom, thread linking names, printouts, copied pages from the diary. I'd highlighted every transaction I could trace from the Harper Trust over the last 10 years. Most led nowhere, but a few tied directly to Margaret's hand. Her signature looped and elegant, like she thought style could cover theft. My fingers hovered over the receipts, one from 5 years ago. $1,200 wired to D. Harper, Personal Development Fund. Daniel, Uncle Daniel. I blinked. That phrase, it was vague enough to mean anything. And yet the date on that slip, it was 3 weeks after he'd asked me if I could spot him for a car repair, said he didn't want Margaret to know. I remembered handing him an envelope with $600 in it. He called me dependable. I'd believed him. My stomach twisted. Was there anyone in this family who hadn't taken from me? I sank into my desk chair and rubbed the side of my neck, watching the city lights flicker through the blinds. I'd spent years thinking I was forgettable, replaceable, the helper, the extra set of hands. But I wasn't forgotten. I was used. I pulled out a folder labeled Taxes Margaret and started cross-checking transfers. Most were small, just under reporting thresholds, just enough to stay quiet. But the dates lined up with emergencies, Grandma's medical scare, Lily's semester abroad, even that roof replacement Margaret claimed she'd taken a loan for. She never took a loan. She took from me, and I had the paper to prove it. I snapped photos, every receipt, every transfer, every crossed-out line item she'd tried to bury in coded language. My fingers were ice cold as I labeled each file and backed them up, twice. Then I opened the last envelope I hadn't touched yet. It wasn't dated. No name, just a printed page. A message typed in plain black font. You'll need more than this. She's still 3 moves ahead. Check the guest account. No signature, just a string of numbers. I typed it into my browser, pulse rising. A password-protected folder opened. I guessed twice. On the 3rd try, it unlocked with a phrase I didn't expect to work. My name. Inside were PDFs, dozens of them, scanned emails, bank notices, photos of Margaret's ledger, ones not in the diary, notations about withdrawals labeled "For Emily but never received." She had fabricated a paper trail, in my name. I felt it in my chest, a deep cutting shame I didn't deserve but couldn't shake. She hadn't just stolen from me, she'd rewritten the evidence to make me look complicit. If I'd come forward without this folder, no one would have believed me. I swallowed hard and printed every single file. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid the pages across the floor in rows, my bare feet brushing the corners as I pieced the story together. A map of betrayal, a decade of slow theft. And at the center of it, Margaret, carefully orchestrating every string. Around 3 a.m., I stood at the window again, sipping stale coffee and watching the early fog rise. Then I saw it, a figure across the street, still, hooded, watching. I didn't move, just reached for my phone and started recording. They didn't stay long, just stood there for a minute, then turned and vanished down the block like smoke. I checked the footage. Blurry. Too dark to identify. But they'd been there, and they wanted me to know it. I shut the curtains and turned on every light in the apartment. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was war. I pulled out my notebook and scribbled a name. Sarah. I hadn't seen her in years, not since we were kids. But Grandma always said Sarah had a good head for numbers, and she worked in legal now, somewhere downtown. I needed help, real help. Someone who could look at this mess and tell me what I actually had and how to make it matter in court. Because if Margaret was 3 moves ahead, I was done playing by her rules. The sky over Richmond was steel gray when I stepped outside the next morning. I pulled my jacket tighter, the wind biting through my sleeves. In my bag were 3 flash drives, each one loaded with every file, photo, and scanned document I'd gathered. One stayed at home in a fireproof box. One was in my pocket. The third was for her. Sarah. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since high school. The girl who used to sketch constellations on her sneakers and run circles around our math teacher. I never imagined she'd be the person I'd call with my life unraveling in the background. But I remembered what Grandma once said, a passing comment over afternoon tea. That Sarah girl, sharp as a blade, loyal too. I hoped she was still both. I waited outside the cafe near the courthouse, hands jammed in my coat pockets. My breath curled in front of me. The clink of dishes inside and the low murmur of voices felt too normal, like the world hadn't noticed the storm I was dragging in behind me. Then she appeared. Same sharp eyes, same fast walk, just dressed in a charcoal blazer now and carrying a leather folio under one arm. "Emily Harper," she said, her voice low, like she wasn't sure it was really me. I nodded. "It's been a while." We sat at a table in the back, the one with the warped edge and a half-burnt candle in the middle. I handed her the flash drive. No preamble. She raised an eyebrow but plugged it into her laptop without a word. As the files loaded, I watched her face shift, from polite curiosity to confusion to something that looked like fury. She leaned back after a few minutes, eyes locked on mine. "Where the hell did you get all this?" "I lived it," I said quietly. She pinched the bridge of her nose, then straightened. "These transactions, these signatures. Emily, this isn't just shady bookkeeping. This is criminal." I nodded. "I know." Sarah scrolled faster now, her mouth a tight line. "She used your name to justify withdrawals. She masked transfers as family expenses, then funneled them into personal investments. Real estate, too," I added. "She bought a second property last year, cash." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "She's laundering money through a trust, under your name. That's not just immoral, it's prosecutable." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Sarah looked up. "Did you sign anything?" "No, never." "Good. That's what saves you." I swallowed. "There's more." She raised an eyebrow. I reached into my bag and pulled out the copy of the unsigned will, the one Grandma drafted but never got to file, the one that named me as sole heir. Sarah scanned it, eyes narrowing. "Was this in the diary?" I nodded. "Hidden between pages. Margaret doesn't know I found it." Sarah tapped her nail against the table. "If this is real, and I'll need to verify the notary stamp, then you've got a case, a strong one." Something loosened in my chest. Hope. It felt foreign. "But," she added, "Margaret won't go quietly. She's been preparing for this. You can see it in how she structured the theft. Years of effort. She'll come at you with everything she's got." I looked down. "She already is." Sarah leaned forward. "Then you need to fight back. Publicly. Legally. No more hiding." My fingers curled around my coffee mug. "You'll help me?" She didn't even blink. "I already am." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I stared through the glass, watching a man in a dark coat cross the street. For a second, I thought it might be the same figure from the night before, the one watching from the sidewalk, but this one turned the corner and vanished. Sarah closed her laptop. "I'll file a motion to preserve the estate assets. That'll freeze the trust temporarily. She can't drain anything else while we're in court." "What do I do in the meantime?" "Stay safe, keep records, and don't let her know you're coming." We left the cafe together, but she took a different exit. I walked home slowly, boots echoing on the concrete, heart heavier than I wanted to admit. Back at my apartment, I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock the door. The air inside was warm, stale. The stack of documents still lay where I'd left them, the corkboard untouched. I stared at it, fingers brushing a photo pinned to the top. Grandma smiling in the garden, a shawl over her shoulders, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years. Peace. I whispered to the room, "I'm going to finish this, I promise." Just then, a sharp knock at the door. Not the mail slot, not the buzzer. A knock. 3 times. I stepped quietly to the peephole. No one there. But taped to the door was another envelope. No name, no handwriting. Inside, one photo. A picture of me, taken from behind, standing in the courthouse cafe, from just hours ago. The photo shook slightly in my hand. It was grainy but unmistakable, my coat, my posture, the way I leaned across the table, captured from behind the frosted glass of the cafe window. Hours ago. Someone had followed me. The hallway of my apartment building buzzed with the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, but my focus tunneled on the photograph. Who had taken it, and why? Was it Margaret? A warning? A threat? Or worse, was she trying to bait me into fear? I slipped the photo into a manila folder along with the other anonymous letters. I didn't know what game she was playing, but I'd stopped being afraid of her the second I called Sarah. By the next morning, we were in motion. Sarah met me at the courthouse steps just after 9 a.m. The November wind swept down the marble facade, pushing against my coat and flaring her blazer. She handed me a pen and a clipboard. "This is your motion," she said. "Petition to formally open the trust for investigation and freeze all Harper Estate disbursements." My hand trembled slightly as I signed. A part of me had imagined this moment differently. Dramatic, cathartic, but instead it was quiet, almost clinical, like all the rage I'd carried for years had boiled down to ink on paper. Still, something shifted inside me when I handed the forms back, something hard and permanent. "I want this to be public," I said. Sarah glanced up. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "She made me disappear. I won't do it to myself." She gave a single short nod. "Then we're in." The clerk stamped the papers. The noise echoed in the hallway, final, like a gavel. It wasn't the end. It was just the opening shot. Later that week, the first hearing was scheduled. Margaret didn't respond directly, but I knew she'd heard. Because 2 days after the motion was filed, I got a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this. No name, no punctuation, just those 4 words. I showed Sarah, who barely blinked. "Good. That means it's working." Court day came fast. The courtroom was colder than I expected, all gray stone and hushed movement. Sarah stood at my side like a shield, flipping open a thick folder as the judge entered. Margaret sat across from us. She was dressed like grief. Black suit, pearls, a somber expression carved from marble. Beside her, a woman with high heels and sharper eyes, her attorney. Margaret didn't look at me once, not even when the judge called my name. Sarah rose. "Your Honor, we are petitioning to unseal Harper Trust records and establish standing for Emily Harper as beneficiary and whistleblower. We submit that funds have been misappropriated by the current trustee." She laid out the evidence. Clear, sharp, undeniable. The diary, the statements, the forgeries. Then the opposing counsel stood. Her voice was velvet-wrapped steel. "Your Honor, this is a family matter steeped in emotional distortion. Ms. Harper is retaliating because she was not named a primary heir. We assert these documents were obtained unethically and lack chain of custody." I felt my fists clench, but Sarah didn't flinch. She laid down the unsigned will, the ledger, the fake deposits in my name. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of pages turning. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Midway through the hearing, the bailiff approached the bench with a note. The judge read it, blinked, then looked directly at me. "Ms. Harper, a new party has entered a supporting affidavit on your behalf. Would you confirm whether you know a Lily Harper?" My breath caught. I nodded. "Yes." He nodded back. "Then we'll enter her statement into the record." Margaret stiffened. For the first time, her mask cracked. Her lawyer leaned in quickly, whispering something urgent. Margaret's hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale. After the recess, we reconvened. Lily's affidavit was brief, but it confirmed what I'd long suspected. Margaret intercepted Grandma's paperwork. She'd altered access, concealed intent, and lied to both of us. The judge didn't rule that day. He said it would take review, that the documents needed authentication. But he granted Sarah's request for a temporary freeze on all trust withdrawals. Margaret stood to leave before the judge finished speaking. She brushed past me in the aisle, her shoulder catching mine hard enough to jar. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You have no idea what I'm still holding." Her breath smelled like mint and something rotten underneath. I turned to face her. "Then show your hand." She smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night I went home to silence. No new letters, no shadows outside my window, but something didn't feel right. I unlocked my phone and opened the app that tracked my financial accounts, just in case. And there it was. A pending withdrawal for $250 from a checking account I hadn't used in 6 years. An account tied to my name. A ghost account. One Margaret had never had access to until now. After the courtroom doors closed, so did every mouth in my family. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email from Aunt Margaret. Just silence, a wide, echoing vacuum where confrontation used to live. I told myself it was a gift. I told myself this was the quiet I'd been begging for all my life. But some nights, the quiet felt like punishment. I sat in the middle of my living room floor, surrounded by boxes I hadn't touched in months. Legal documents, old letters, court printouts. One was still sealed, Lily's affidavit. I hadn't opened it since the judge read it aloud. Maybe I didn't need to. I pulled out my paints instead. My apartment still smelled faintly of roasted coffee and damp paper. I cracked the windows open just an inch. Outside, the city was alive but distant. Muffled sirens, distant laughter. A rhythm I wasn't part of. I hadn't painted in weeks, maybe months. Not since before I found the diary. Not since I stopped being the version of myself who believed in forgiveness before boundaries. The first brushstroke was green. I didn't think, just painted. Soft arcs, jagged streaks, nothing that made sense, but it felt right, like I was unlearning something. The silence that used to claw at me now felt earned. Every time I looked at the unopened messages on my phone, Margaret's last lawyerly threat, Daniel's one-line check-in that said nothing, Lily's apology that lingered unread, I let them sit. I didn't answer. I didn't erase them. But I didn't reply either. That was its own kind of power. By midweek, I'd finished 3 canvases. One was just reds over blacks. Another looked like something between a storm and a scream. The third, I didn't name. I just let it dry in the hallway while I made tea. That's when I saw it. Out the window across the street, a figure again. Same coat, same stillness. But this time, I didn't freeze. I stood taller, mug still in hand, and stared back. They didn't move, didn't wave, just turned, slow, deliberate, and walked out of frame. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. They were watching. Let them. That night, I moved the painting supplies aside and laid out my court notes again. The trial was coming. Sarah said the evidence was strong. Margaret's forged transfers, her fake paper trail, the diary. But I still didn't know who had sent the letters, or how they had access to things even I couldn't find. The mystery lingered like perfume in a room you'd forgotten someone wore. I kept my phone close, screen dimmed, always watching. That weekend, I got the text. Unknown number, no greeting, just, "You stopped the check. You'll regret it." I stared at the words for a long time. A flicker of rage flared up in my chest, but it faded just as fast. I didn't reply. I went to my bank app, double-checked all auto payments, and canceled the one Margaret had somehow slipped through, again. That was the last thread I was cutting. They weren't just out of my pocket. They were out of my reach, and that was the first time I truly felt free, until midnight came, and someone knocked on my door, not loud, just insistent, measured. I stayed still, didn't make a sound. Then, a second knock, a pause, and then the faint rustle of something slipping beneath the door. I waited until the hallway light shut off before moving. Another envelope, cream-colored. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed. You think the worst is behind you, but the final document changes everything, and it's still hidden. No signature, no clue where it came from, just that line. I folded it slowly and stared at the door. I thought I was done searching. I was wrong. The letter sat on my coffee table, its single sentence echoing louder than anything Margaret had said in court. The final document changes everything. I stared at those words until the ink blurred. My tea had gone cold. The candles I'd lit hours earlier were nothing but hunched-over wax stumps, the kind that flicker out without warning. I hadn't moved in nearly 40 minutes. If this document was real, if something even more damning than the forged ledgers, siphoned transfers, or intercepted wills existed, it meant I was still missing a piece. And I didn't have time to miss anything. The trial date was days away. I slipped on my coat and grabbed the diary from its drawer. Flipping to the final pages, I ran my fingers along the worn spine. Had I skipped something? Overlooked a note? A signature? A phrase disguised in Grandma's careful cursive? Then I found it. Near the bottom corner of the inside back cover, barely visible under the glare of my desk lamp, was a name scrawled in fading pencil. Ruth K. Ellison. It wasn't familiar. Not a family name. Not an attorney I'd dealt with. But next to it, a date. March 2015. The same month Grandma drafted her hidden will. I took a picture and sent it to Sarah with a short message. "Who is this?" Less than an hour later, she called. Ruth Ellison is a retired estate attorney, used to handle wills, trusts, all old money clients in the South. My heart pounded. Does she still practice? Officially, no, but she still consults. Want me to set something up? I want to meet her, now. It took some nudging, but by noon the next day, I was standing in front of a yellow-painted bungalow on the outskirts of Charlottesville. Wind whistled through the chimney, and a chime hanging on the porch trembled like it knew something I didn't. Ruth opened the door herself, gray curls, oversized sweater, glasses with smudged lenses. "You're Eloise Harper's girl," she said, before I could even introduce myself. "I was wondering when you'd come." Inside, her home smelled like lemon oil and dried herbs. A pot of something boiled on the stove, chamomile maybe. She gestured for me to sit at a small round table in the corner, already set with a folder and 2 mugs. "She wanted to change everything," Ruth said, sliding the folder toward me. "New trustee, new beneficiary. She was clear about that." I swallowed hard. "Did she sign it?" "She did, but she asked me to hold the document until she could submit it herself, said she needed time, that Margaret was watching everything." My fingers curled against the edge of the table. "She never submitted it." Ruth's gaze sharpened. "And that's what bothered me." Weeks passed. Then I got a letter. 1 sentence. "Do not file anything further. I made a mistake." But it wasn't in her handwriting. My stomach dropped. "Do you still have it?" Ruth nodded. "And I have the original signed document. I didn't destroy it." She stood, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside, pages, signed, dated, witnessed, my name as the sole heir. Margaret removed entirely. A trust reassigned under third-party supervision. It was real, and it changed everything. Ruth slid over a second document, the letter that told her to stop. I recognized the writing immediately. Margaret's. The looped G, the dramatic slant of the M, but she'd signed it as Eloise. Forgery. Proof. I couldn't breathe. Sarah confirmed everything later that night. "If we introduce this," she said, "Margaret's whole case collapses. It proves not just theft, but fraud. Intentional, premeditated fraud." The air in my apartment felt different, tighter, like the storm I'd been walking through for months was finally funneling into something I could name, and then another envelope. No knock this time, just silence. I found it in the mailbox. Inside, a photo of Grandma and Margaret, dated a year before her death. They stood in the garden, but something was off. Grandma's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her hand wasn't resting on Margaret's shoulder. It was clenched at her side, fingers curled into a fist. Behind them, in the blurred background, was Lily, watching. I flipped the photo over, in the same familiar handwriting. "Ask Lily what she saw. March 12th. I checked my notes. March 12, 2015, the day after Grandma signed the new will. My pulse thundered, because if Lily saw something, she might have been carrying the final truth this whole time. Lily didn't speak at first. We stood beneath the magnolia tree at the edge of the Harper estate, where Grandma used to prune branches while humming to herself. Late spring winds stirred the air, sweet with damp earth and rain-soaked petals. The diary rested between us on the bench, its edges softened with use. "What happened March 12th?" I asked, voice barely louder than the leaves rustling above. Lily's eyes flicked to mine. Her lip trembled. Then, with one breath, she said it. "I saw Margaret switch the envelope." My heart tightened. She came into Grandma's study late that night, said she was cleaning. But when I walked past the open door, I saw 2 envelopes on the desk. One was labeled for Ruth Ellison. The other was blank. Margaret took the labeled one and slid it into her purse, left the blank one behind. I sat down, the bench creaking beneath me. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I was scared," she whispered, and she told me if I ever mentioned that night, she'd cut me off. Said no one would believe me anyway. Now I did. Because I had the signed will, Ruth's affidavit, and Lily's witness statement. I had everything. A week later, the final hearing began. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension, reporters sitting in the back row this time, scribbling notes. Margaret wore navy this time, not black, and her expression was tight as porcelain. Her lawyer sat straighter, more alert, eyes darting at every word Sarah spoke. Sarah stood and walked the court through the forged documents, the falsified withdrawals, the letter Margaret penned pretending to be Grandma. Then came Ruth, steady and unshaken, confirming the original will's authenticity. Finally, Lily took the stand. Her hands shook as she held the microphone, but her voice was clear. "I saw my aunt commit fraud," she said, "and I stayed quiet out of fear." Margaret's face drained of color. When it was my turn, I didn't bring notes. I just told the truth. "For most of my life," I said, "I believed that love and silence were the same thing, that if I gave enough, money, time, forgiveness, I'd eventually be seen. But the more I gave, the more invisible I became." I looked straight at Margaret. "You didn't just steal money. You erased me. You took the life I was supposed to have and passed it off as your right." Her gaze didn't flinch, but her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the defense table. By afternoon, the judge rendered his decision. Margaret Harper was found liable for financial fraud, willful misappropriation of trust funds, and forgery. Her control of the estate was immediately revoked. The trust was returned to its original beneficiary, me. Outside the courthouse, the sky broke open into a soft spring rain. I didn't have an umbrella. I didn't care. The drops rolled down my face as I walked past the reporters, past Sarah, past the courthouse steps, free, not just legally, not just financially, but emotionally. A week later, I stood at the community center's stage facing a room full of women, some in suits, some in sneakers, some with tired eyes that mirrored my own. They asked me to speak about boundaries, about silence, about survival. So I told them what I wish someone had told me at 16, that helping is not the same as belonging, that silence doesn't earn love, it just delays the explosion, and that the most radical thing a person can do is say no. When I finished, no one clapped right away. But then one woman stood, then another, and another. It wasn't about applause, it was about being seen. Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened my windows and lit a candle. Not for ceremony, for air, for space, for myself. I walked past the old court folders now packed neatly into a box marked closed, past the paintings I'd begun again, and I paused at the fridge where I'd pinned the final page of the diary, now laminated. Grandma's last line, "Don't be afraid to make noise." She would have been proud. I know that now. And for the first time, I wasn't carrying her legacy for someone else. I was carrying it forward. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs a reminder. Silence isn't strength, your voice is. And if you want more stories like this, be sure to check out our next video.